Hi. So, the great conflict. What are we talking about today? We're talking about protagonist and antagonist. And this is something that can be slightly intimidating to talk to or start to lead a group of younger kids in these discussions. But when we get down to the basics of what we're talking about, it's actually really simple and it leads to some of the best conversation. So let's talk about what the antagonist or who the antagonist and who the protagonist are in the storyline so that you can start leading your small group in these discussions. So, when we go back to our story roller coaster, which we talked about in the last video, we have introduced the kids to our characters as that beginning portion of the roller coaster starting out. And they're getting to know who they are, they're getting to run into some problems along the way. That's as that roller coaster is lifting up and we get some little bumps along the way. They're running into some little problems. And these little problems might be confused with the main problem of the story. And a lot of times you do run into that where you think, oh, this is it. But if you keep on riding that coaster, you'll realize that is not the main problem. That is just the buildup. That's still part of the rise to that final climax of the story at the tip top of the hill. So that also can lead to some really great discussions in talking about these little hills along the way. Um, One of the greatest stories I can think of for that would be The Hobbit. And there were so many little bumps along the way where you're running into spiders and goblins and Smeagol and all the different things. And you think this is it, but there's still more. And those were just the build up to get to that last step. So as you're trying to determine what is that big main problem of your story, you are also then going to be talking about who your protagonist is, because your protagonist is the character that is going to have to solve that problem. So that would be a great way to sum it up for the kids and say, our protagonist is kind of our main character, where whatever this main problem is, this person, this animal, whatever it is trying to solve that problem. This is most likely our protagonist. A lot of times, um, the protagonist, the name will be found in the title of the book. Not always, but oftentimes it is. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky. For instance, when we did Charlotte's Web, that led to some really interesting discussions because everybody thinks Wilbur is your protagonist because he's definitely the main character in the story. But you could argue and say he's your protagonist because what's he trying to accomplish? Not dying. That's pretty good conflict there. That's a big problem. But then you have Charlotte, who is actually, her name is in the title of the book, and she is the one who ultimately is working and spinning the web and trying to figure out how she's going to save Wilbur. Wilbur's just kind of depending on Charlotte to do the job. So then it brings you around to this idea of, oh, maybe Charlotte is our protagonist, even though Wilbur seems to be the star of the book. So talk about some great conversations. I mean, you can have 5-year-olds talking about this, but you can also have 12, 13, 14 and up in the same conversation. I mean, you'll have parents in this conversation trying to figure this one out. And the beauty of trying to figure out your protagonist is sometimes you actually do not know who it is. Same goes for your antagonist when we start talking about that. And that's where you can go online, you can look at forums and look at book discussions. You can look at some of those websites that give you study notes on book reviews and everything, and they're going to tell you different answers because everybody has a different perspective, and so they're a lot of times going to just have a different thought on who your protagonist is, and that's great. That leads to perfect fodder for discussion. So now when it comes to our antagonist is basically the character that is doing the opposite. So if our protagonist is pushing forward in action, our antagonist is pretty easily recognizable because they are pushing back against that action. So I have a printable, looks like this. So if you go to the show notes, I'll have a link to this. It'll be a free printable that you can grab off of My Teachers Pay Teachers. And this could be something you can show to the kids. It could be something you could put in your files just as a reference. But what I actually really like to do is I like to call the kids up. I like to get two volunteers and have them come up, and they're literally going to go hand to hand. Obviously, problem is not going to be in the middle of them, but you're going to put them hand to hand, and one person you're going to label as your protagonist, and they're going to be pushing, and then the other person is going to be the antagonist, and they're going to be pushing against them. And you're going to tell the kids, this is an example. This is what our characters are doing in our story. This is how the conflict or the problem is going to get solved, is when our protagonist actually overcomes the antagonist. And that is going to be that climax of the story when they're able to push through. So now I'm going to give you a hint, and I'm going to say I've learned this the hard way. If you have a group of book clubbers, and you have family members, and you have brothers and sisters, or brothers and brothers, or whatever, if you have siblings, you may not want to put siblings up here, because this might turn into WrestleMania, and that's going to be a whole nother thing, and the group's going to go wild. And I mean, it could be another great picture, but you may want to just avoid that altogether, and don't put siblings against each other for this example. So, but that's a great way to help them understand it. And I've been doing it for 8 years, and I still bring up two people each time. And when we start naming who we think protagonist is and who we think antagonist is, we kind of pit them against each other, and we say, well, who is winning right now, and who's overcoming this conflict? And it's really a great time also to have the discussion with them and talk about the fact that your protagonist is not always your good guy, and your antagonist your bad guy. Like, that's what we often think of, is this is our hero and this is our villain. But it's not always the case. Sometimes your protagonist is a child who is the main thing they're wanting to do is something that really shouldn't be done, and you have an antagonist who is trying to stop them. So then you can have the discussion and say, well, maybe the roles are reversed. Maybe the one trying to stop them from doing something ridiculous, maybe this person is the protagonist and this one is the antagonist. So it really, there's a lot of discussion that can go into this. Um, the other thing to talk about in that is that um, there are different types of protagonists and antagonists. So, for example, your protagonist may be pushing against another, it might be human to human, but this might be an animal story, and you have animal against animal. Or you might have human against nature, and they're battling some kind of weather phenomenon, like a tornado, chasing tornadoes. I don't know. And it may be animal versus nature. And some of the funnest are if you get your protagonist and your antagonist are the same person. So if your main character, if their antagonist is themselves, and they are the ones who is holding themselves back from accomplishing what they need to do. So, I mean, talk about some great life lesson type of stories. So, uh, a clue that you're going to get one of those is if you're doing a coming of age story. So, two of them that I can think of right off the bat, that we had our protagonist and our antagonist come out to be the same person. Now, also, like I said, different people have different opinions. So you may have a different opinion on this, and you may look online and find other opinions. But the conclusion we came to was when we did Tom Sawyer. Um, that was one where Tom had to overcome his fear of the consequences for telling the truth, and what had really happened. And so that was a really great story of kind of a coming of age, and the antagonist that was holding him back was actually himself and his own fear. So that comes up a lot. It's your character's fear is holding them back, and then they have to conquer that. And usually the hills, the problems along the way are building up, and they're helping your protagonist to become braver and braver and braver, to where they can finally overcome their own fear. So those lead to some really great stories. Another one, we read The Yearling last year. Brutally sad story. Give you the warning on that, but it was a really great one. It's a coming of age, um, and it's another one where you can just get in there and really discuss who is who's the enemy here? Who's the one that's pushing back against um, the agenda, like what they're trying to accomplish? And so both of those are coming of age stories. Um, so those, I mean, it's some of your greatest conversations are going to come from talking about who your antagonist and your protagonist is. So I would love to hear in the comments who you think the greatest protagonist antagonist duo of all time are. I have a couple ideas on who I think, and I know I'm yet to come across new ones and new stories as time goes on, but I'd love to hear. Now, if you've been following along with all the different videos so far, then you know that I follow a 6-week per book timeline, and we've done this for 8 years. It has worked really well. It's not too long and it's not too short, and I break it down, and I have very specific things that we do at each meeting, and that helps keep things interesting, but it also helps me to not feel overwhelmed. It's simple because once you get this outline going, you just repeat it over and over again with each book, and it doesn't get old because the story is new each time. So what we've already covered are the author study, and then the second week, we typically do the story roller coaster, setting it up and just getting into the setting, introducing the characters and all of that. So definitely go back to the past videos if you haven't. I actually have some links throughout the show notes for some printables that can show visuals of this that you can just keep on like printing out and putting into a notebook to help you get your group started. Um, like I said, this printable is going to be right there in the show notes on this video. So you can, it just hit the link. It'll take you straight to the Teachers Pay Teachers. You'll see it right there on the storefront as a printable. Just click on it and it prints it right out. And so you could use that as a picture to show your group, or you can just keep it for your own purposes. But if you could like, subscribe. And like I said, I'd love to hear who your favorite antagonist, protagonist are of all time. That would be awesome. The other thing is on the next video, we're going to get into our, what will that be? Uh, third week, our third week of book club. And so that one, or no, fourth, I'm sorry, fourth week. Uh, See, the weeks are just going so fast. We're almost done. But in that one, we like to continue on the roller coaster. We continue on antagonist, protagonist, and then we start getting into just talking about one literary device that we see used in that book. I don't overwhelm it with tons of different literary devices per book. I choose one and just introduce them to something new per book. It just gives them something to be looking for in the storyline, tools that the author is using to really build up the story for them. So next video, I'm going to go over just helping you to lead some discussions on literary devices. So I'll see you next time. Thanks.